Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign, Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. We're recording this at noon on Tuesday, May 15th, in the studios of Urbana Public Television. Our subject is the wars the U.S. government is waging around the world, and the racism we display to those we're killing, in accord with the Latin proverb, proprium humanae ingeni est, odissi quim lesers. It's human nature to hate those you have injured. At this moment, the U.S. is making war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, principally to control the flow of oil out of the Mideast and North Africa, which the U.S. uses as a weapon against its economic rivals from Germany to China. Thousands of U.S. troops are killing people in these countries, although most Americans are barely aware of it. More than 250,000 U.S. troops are stationed in 1,000 U.S. bases on foreign soil, most of them ringing Russia and China. The 70,000 members of the U.S. Special Operations Command are active in 3/4 of the countries of the world. Their activities include kidnapping, we call it rendition, torture, and murder. As the rest of the world recognizes, but Americans don't, they're nothing less than American death squads. The rest of the world recognizes that the U.S. today is what Martin Luther King called it long ago, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, an international criminal surpassing all others. But most Americans don't know that, protected as they are by government and media propaganda. What we do here at Aware on the Air is try to encourage our fellow citizens to find out about that and to oppose U.S. government killing around the world. The crime of this week has been committed by American client Israel, attacking unarmed protesters, including children and journalists. Israeli snipers shot 1,400 Gaza border protesters yesterday, killing 60 so far. While media reports the trigger to be the U.S. Embassy move, the context is the blockade of Gaza and a criminal corruption probe into Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, which threatens to bring down his government. The decision to open a U.S. embassy in Jerusalem has been met with deadly clashes, according to CNN, along the Israeli-Gaza border. It doesn't say where the clashes come from. At least 58, or more than 60 actually, Palestinians were killed in protests and confrontations on Monday as the new embassy was officially open. Global leaders condemned Israeli forces for using lethal force against protesters, but there could be even more bloodshed to come. Today, Palestinians are observing what they call Nakba, or catastrophe, in memory of the more than 700,000 Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed for the establishment of the State of Israel. The 1948 exodus of Palestinians from the new state occurred when Arabs fled or were expelled from their homes at the outset of the 1948 Palestine War. Between 400 and 600 Palestinian villages were sacked during the war, while urban Palestine was almost entirely extinguished. The term Nakba also refers to the period of war itself and events affecting Palestinians from December of 1947 to January of 1949, the ethnic cleansing of the land by the Israelis. The precise number of refugees, many of whom settled in refugee camps in neighboring states, is a matter of dispute, but perhaps 80% of the Arab inhabitants of what became Israel left or were expelled from their homes. About 250,000 to 300,000 Palestinians had fled or been expelled before the Israeli Declaration of Independence in May 1948, a fact that was named as a casus belli for the entry of the Arab League into the country at the beginning of the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, headlines Jerusalem celebrates, Tel Aviv parties, and Gaza bleeds, a surreal 24 hours. Tens of thousands of people attended the funerals of the 60 Gazans killed by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, occupation forces, in border protests. Palestinians protested near the Israeli-Gaza border, and U.S. and Israeli dignitaries applauded the opening ceremony of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. The two pictures are posted side by side on the front page of Haaretz. An aspect of the celebration is noted by Haaretz when it says Messianic U.S.-Israel axis showcased at Jerusalem embassy ceremony is a gut punch for most American Jews. This refers to the theological observations of American ministers who were present at the opening of the embassy, including one who declared, casually of course, that all Jews are going to hell, not because of what Israel is doing, but because of his theological predilections. The website Mondoweiss, which is a good source of a balance to the one-sided American mainstream media accounts, notes that yesterday was a horrifying and tragic day in Palestine. The Israeli military opened fire on Gaza protesters as the U.S. and Israeli governments celebrated the move of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, in which what was the deadliest day in Gaza since the end of Operation Protective Edge in 2014, the Israeli attack on Gaza. America crossed every red line, said Mondoweiss. Palestinians in Jerusalem protest the new U.S. Embassy, and Israel kills more than 60 protesters during the deadliest day in Gaza in 4 years. If not now, the American political group blocked traffic outside the Trump D.C. hotel to protest the embassy move. Israeli government minister justified the Gaza massacre by calling Palestinians Nazis. Gaza, Gaza is the chant from Palestinians demonstrating near the new U.S. Embassy. Ajamu Baraka, who ran for vice president on the Green ticket last year, writes about the situation. He says, yesterday was a horrifying and tragic day in Palestine. The Israeli military opened fire on Gaza protesters, and as the U.S. and Israeli government celebrated the move to Jerusalem in what was the deadliest day in Gaza since the end of Operation Protective Edge in 2014. The Democrats in America were quite silent about the whole business. They're ready to support Trump's war on Syria. They were ready to support Trump's war on Syria to, quote, punish the government of Syria after it was reported that the army had gassed civilians. But the Israelis killed more than 60 human beings on one day and close to 100 over the last few weeks, and silence from both American political parties. Yesterday was a turning point for the criminal regime in Israel. The nature of that state was revealed even to the super-propagandized U.S. public. The Black Alliance for Peace, for which Baraka speaks, condemns slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, calls upon members of the U.S. Congressional Black Caucus and leadership of the Poor People's Campaign to publicly condemn Israeli violence. Obama gave impunity for crimes against humanity committed by Bush officials like Gina Haspel, the new director of the CIA, while his Department of Justice prosecuted Snowden, the Freddie Gray resistors in Baltimore, and Julian Assange, that set stage for Trump to be in a position to get his hands on Assange. Most people don't realize that 1968 was the pivotal year for counter-revolution in the U.S. and Western Europe. The capitalist class was under assault and had real concerns about its survival when it decided to launch a murderous counter against popular forces worldwide. It's taken us a long time to realize that this is a 50-year counter-revolution by the United States government, Republican and Democratic administrations alike, but that indeed is the case. The Democrats are today not standing up for anything except impeaching Trump. That's what they're running on. Even Sanders can't help himself from emphasizing the bogus Hamas violence theme. Hamas is the party that is in charge in Gaza. Bernie Sanders says, quote, over 50 killed in Gaza today and 2,000 wounded, on top of the 41 killed and more than 9,000 wounded over the past weeks. This is a staggering toll. Hamas violence does not justify Israel firing on unarmed protesters, close quote. That's the most extreme claim we get from the Democrats. The blogger Gary Brecker, who writes well on war topics, says a huge massacre. Death toll now given is 58 with 2,700 wounded. And wounded is a very light term for this. There'll be many disabled for life, which is a blockaded resettlement zone, which in a blockaded resettlement zone like Gaza means families exhausting themselves for decades trying to find medical care, supplies, and accessible transport. The dead are a different sort of burden to the community. In cold terms, Hamas wins at terrible cost and Israel loses today, but insurgents, it's worth remembering, are human and come from families. Families want justice. Thus, the first intifada, rocks against tanks, is followed by the second, more lethal one. Israel probably wants Hamas to jump to that stage, which it knows how to exploit in its time-honored fashion. That is, more war. But that's a short-term solution at best. Does Israel have any long-term one? I can't see it. The long slide to pariah status in the international community, Israel blamed for its crimes, the retreat to raw ethno-religious chauvinism, which describes Israeli policy right now, and the bottom line, quote, we've got the U.S. backing us and nukes, which means another round, another dozen, maybe 100 more rounds of this, followed by the transformation, distraction, or extinction of the foreign backer, at which point it will become clear that the nukes are not really such effective deterrents. Couldn't see any other end to this. There could have been a relatively happy ending once, something better than the slow metal fatigue attrition, but that doesn't mean that there is one now. A promo heard on NPR yesterday, quote, the U.S. opened its embassy in Jerusalem today. It was met with cheers from Israelis, but some Palestinians were not so happy, close quote. That's how the American liberal media treated the matter. And one thing you can count on in American stories on this, the passive voice will have a big, big day. Instead of the classic who did what to whom sentence from Journalism 101, you'll see 1,000 variations on something happened to some people. The Washington Post headline, for example, quote, under banner of peace, U.S. opens embassy in Jerusalem. 60 miles away, dozens of Palestinians are killed. Close quote. The comment, it must have been a really bad traffic accident or tornado outbreak, I guess, to kill all those people. You're listening to Aware on the Air, our attempt each week to talk about the war making of the United States against the fog of propaganda that occupies the American media. Here's a comment, and be careful of the irony. Irony can get you into trouble. Be careful of the irony. A comment from Uri Avnery, an Israeli writer and peace activist who has, I think Avnery's in his 80s now, has been a Israeli political figure since the time of the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Quote, if you want to understand the policy of a nation, look at a map, Napoleon is supposed to have said. It's good advice. If you're living in Israel these days, you get the impression that the huge state of Israel is dictating to its American vassal what to do about Iran. In other circumstances, we referred to this as the higher anti-Semitism, the notion that Jews made us do it. President Donald Trump listens and complies. Bibi the Great, the Prime Minister of Israel, tells him to tear up the Iranian deal for no obvious reason, and he obeys. He has no choice, poor man. But then you look at the map, and to your great surprise, you discover that the USA is a huge country, while Israel is a mere speck, so small that its name has to be written outside its borders in the sea. So what is wrong? Geography, of course, is not the only factor. Israel has some millions of faithful adherents who are American citizens and have a lot of money. But still, can it be that we got the picture wrong? That Trump is not the vassal of Netanyahu? That it's the other way around? That Trump dictates and Bibi, for all his bluster, just obeys? It would not be the first time. In ancient times, the leaders of the Jewish Commonwealth in Palestine tried very hard to please the imperator, the emperor, in Rome. Nero, for example, the man who enjoyed setting fire to his own city and to the world while playing the flute or whatever. Donald Trump is the present-day Nero, the imperator of the New Rome. Trump's main object in life is to get out of the Iran deal, quote, the worst deal ever. Why? I've listened intently and discerned no other reason that the deal was forged by his hated predecessor, Barack Obama. What other reason was there for annulling the deal? I've heard none. The deal stopped Iran from proceeding with the building of a nuclear weapon. All experts, without exception, even in Israel, confirm that Iran was scrupulously adhering to its commitment. Indeed, the entire world outside the U.S., and Israel, of course, has now decided to go on with the deal. Germany, France, and Britain, three not quite insignificant powers, believe that the deal has to be maintained. So do Russia and China, no tiny countries either, except Israel. Ah, Israel. Most people in Israel now believe that Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi the Great, is really leading Trump on a leash. Bibi has such a magical hold over Trump that the American president has to follow Israel's lead. Bibi is obsessed with Iran. He wakes up in the morning with Iran and goes to sleep with Iran. Nobody seems to ask why, for God's sake. Going back to Napoleon's map, there seems to be no clash of interests between the countries of Iran and Israel, no common border, no territories of one that the other desires, also no natural resources of one that the other would like to get its hands on. Proof. Not so long ago, well within my lifetime, this is Uri Avnery, who, as I say, is in his 80s, Iran was Israel's closest ally, except our American vassal, of course. Iran was governed by the Shah, with his beautiful uniform and his beautiful wife. Israel and Iran went to steal chickens together, as we say. The Iranians helped us to when he says us, of course, he means Israel. The Iranians helped us to infiltrate agents into the Kurdish region of Iraq in order to make trouble for the Iraqi dictator, Saddam Hussein. Later, we supported Iran in its war against Iraq, started by the same Hussein. In one of his greatest scandals of its time, the so-called Iran-Contra affair, Israel transferred American arms to Iran. Iran paid for them, and the Americans used the money to illegally finance the Contra War against the leftist government in Nicaragua. My friend Amaran Nir, writes Uri Avnery, a journalist turned government security advisor, personally delivered the arms to Tehran. His U.S. counterpart, Oliver North, has just been appointed to head the powerful National Rifle Association in the U.S. Enough amusing anecdotes. There is no basic antagonism dictated by geography between our two nations, Israel and Iran. So what is it? Well, there is ideology. The present rulers of Iran are extreme Shia Islamists. They want to become the overlords of the Arab Muslim world. The Arabs hate Israel mainly because of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. So the Iranians pretend to be the great enemy of the little Satan, the rather insulting appellation of Israel, to distinguish it from the great Satan, the USA. Frankly, I think that the rulers of Iran don't give a damn about Israel, except as a useful instrument. The hatred of Israel is a weapon in the battle with the Sunni Arab world led by the hyperactive Saudi crown prince. The conflict between Sunni and Shia goes back almost to the times of the Prophet, more than 15 centuries ago. So why is Bibi obsessed with Iran to such an extent that he commands his American vassal to drive towards World War III? It depends upon how cynical you are. If you're very cynical, you might well say that both Trump and Bibi are up to their respective necks in criminal investigations. With a bit of luck, both might end up in prison. What better way to divert the attention of their subjects than a little war? It's a precept that has been tried out since the beginning of the world, and it almost never fails. Who will worry about trifles like Trump's porno stars or Bibi's gifts from American billionaires when the lives of our boys are at stake? The U.S. is still far from war with Iran, but we, Israelis, are not. Perhaps we are already in it without believing it. These days, or should I say these nights, our brave boys fly over Syria and bomb Iranian army installations there. Until this minute, the Iranians have not reacted, except for a feeble attempt that was quickly answered by a massive Israeli airstrike. Why are Iranians there in the first place? It is a part of their objective to create an Iranian sphere of influence, extending from Iran proper to the Mediterranean Sea. In Iraq, which has a large Shia population, they are already dominant. With the help of Russia, they are now almost dominant in Syria. In Lebanon, their close allies, the Shia Hezbollah movement, controls a large part of the country and has just won the elections. The U.S. does not like this at all. True, Trump has decided to withdraw from the Middle East. It costs too much money, but he does not want the void to be filled by Vladimir Putin. A parentheses here, the Trump administration is looking a lot like the Nixon administration, which was instructed in 1968 by the business community to get out of Southeast Asia. So we may have a parallel there. Trump has decided to withdraw from the Middle East, so he sends his boys back because of the Russian presence, and tells Israel to make the life of the Iranians in Syria hell. It's playing with fire, particularly for us Israelis. Until now, the Iranians have limited their reaction to our nightly bombing of their forces, to the utterance of dire threats and the ineffectual response this last week. But for how much longer? Iran is a wise country. Whatever the bluster of the present regime, it does exercise a lot of restraint. It remembers that quite recently, just about 2,500 years ago, it was a world power. It can wait. It does not satisfy Trump's expectations. After all, how long has the U.S. existed? So we bomb. We Israelis bomb. So they react with threats. So Trump is happy. And the Israeli public? One may wonder, is there such a thing? Some local commentators are already asking, have Israeli citizens turned into mere subjects? Israel is obviously on the path to war. The nightly bombing of Iranian forces is an insult to their national pride. In our region, national pride plays a large role. Our army has told the population in the north of the country to open the air raid shelters and prepare them for use. Large anti-aircraft forces have been moved to the Syrian frontier. And the Israelis? They shrug their shoulders. They know that Bibi is a showman of genius. Just now he's held the country and the world in thrall with a superb TV demonstration in which he revealed a wealth of information about Iran's nuclear activities. The brave boys and girls of the Mossad stole this trove in Tehran and brought it to Israel, risking their lives. Wonderful. Except that it turned out that this trove consists of obsolete documents from before the deal, which show that what everybody already knew, that Iran wanted to emulate Israel and produce its own nuclear bomb. It was to prevent this that the nuclear deal was initiated in the first place. But what showmanship! What a stage set! What wonderful American English! What perfect coordination with Trump's decision to scuttle the deal! Can it be that the entire show, Netanyahu's show about the Iranian documents, was ordered by Trump? Some Israeli commentators pointed all this out. But there's no real opposition to Bibi in the Knesset, the popular press, or on TV. The vast majority of the people in Israel, and everywhere else, stand at attention when the word security is mentioned. Okay, Bibi may be a tiny bit corrupt, he may have taken some bribes here and there, but he's our commander-in-chief. He's sending our boys into battle, so hail to the chief, hail Bibi. That's Uri Avnery, who has watched decades of Israeli war-making in the Middle East, talking about the present situation. Try to hear the irony. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to turn to a piece by Jonathan Cook. Jonathan Cook is an Englishman living in Nazareth and writes about the conditions in the region. On Monday and Tuesday, he says, Palestinians commemorate the anniversary of the Nakba, or catastrophe, their mass expulsion and dispossession 70 years ago as the new state of Israel was built on the ruins of their homeland. As a result, many Palestinians were turned into refugees, denied by Israel the right to return to their homes. Tens of thousands turned out on Monday in the occupied territory to protest against 7 decades of Israel's refusal to make amends or end its oppressive rule. The move on Monday of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, a city under belligerent occupation, has only inflamed Palestinian grievances and a sense that the West is still conspiring in their dispossession. The focus of the protests is Gaza, where unarmed Palestinians have been massing every Friday since late March at the perimeter fence and cages 2 million of them. For their troubles, they faced a hail of live ammunition, rubber bullets and clouds of tear gas. Dozens had been killed and many hundreds more maimed, including children. Early reports on Monday suggest that Gaza demonstrators were being massacred by the Israeli army. Amnesty International called the events a horror show. But for more than a month, Israel has been working to manage Western perceptions of the protest and its response in ways designed to discredit the outpouring of anger from Palestinians. In a message all too readily accepted by some Western audiences, Israel has presented the protests as a security threat. Israeli officials have even argued before the country's high court that the protesters lack any rights, that army snipers are entitled to shoot them even if facing no danger because Israel is supposedly in a state of war with Gaza, defending itself. On Sunday night, the Israeli Air Force dropped leaflets across Gaza warning Palestinians not to go near the fence. Quote, "The Israeli Defense Forces is determined to defend Israel's citizens and sovereignty against Hamas attempts at terrorism under cover of violent riots," the leaflet said. Don't get near the fence and don't take part in Hamas show, which endangers you. Many Americans and Europeans, worried about an influx of economic migrants flooding into their own countries, readily sympathize with Israel's concerns and its actions. Until now, the vast majority of Gaza protesters have been peaceful and made no attempt to break through the fence. But Israel claims that Hamas has exploited this week's protests in Gaza to encourage Palestinians to storm the fence. The implication is the protesters have been trying to cross a border and enter Israel illegally. The truth is rather different. There is no border because there is no Palestinian state. Israel's made sure of that. Palestinians live under occupation, with Israel controlling every aspect of their lives. In Gaza, even the air and sea are Israel's domain. Meanwhile, the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their former lands, now in Israel, is recognized in United Nations resolutions. Nonetheless, Israel has been crafting a dishonest counter-narrative ever since the Nakba, myths that historians scouring the archives has slowly exploded. One claim that Arab leaders sold the 750,000 told the 750,000 Palestinian refugees to flee in 1948 was in fact invented by Israel's founding father, David Ben-Gurion. He hoped it would deflect U.S. pressure on Israel to honor its obligations to allow the refugees back. Even had the refugees chosen to leave during the heat of battle rather than wait to be expelled, it would not have justified denying them a right to return when the fighting finished. It was that refusal that transformed the flight into ethnic cleansing. You've been watching Aware on the Air for the 15th of May, 2018, presented by members and friends of AWARE, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign, Urbana, a local peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. Good night.
Welcome back to my conversation with Ray McGovern. Ray McGovern is a former Army infantry intelligence officer and then served as a CIA analyst for 27 years from the Kennedy presidency to the George H.W. Bush presidency. Ray's duties included chairing the national intelligence estimates and preparing for the president's daily brief, which included briefing President Ronald Reagan. He joins us today from Washington, D.C. I thank you so much for joining us again, Ray.
Most welcome.
All right, Ray. So Haspel's hearings to confirm her as the head of the CIA is underway. And in segment one, we showed your opposition to her appointment as such. But many people think this is a foregone conclusion in terms of her appointment that you gravely objected to. I want further information as to why we should oppose her candidacy. But before we do that, let's have a look at another exchange at her hearing.
Please answer yes or no. Do you believe in hindsight that those techniques were immoral?
Senator, what I believe sitting here today is that I support the higher moral standard we have decided to hold ourselves to.
Can you please answer the question?
Senator, I think I've answered the question.
No, you've not. Do you believe the previous techniques, now armed with hindsight, do you believe they were immoral? Yes or no?
Senator, I believe that we should hold ourselves to the moral standard outlined in the Army Field Manual.
Okay, so I understand that you've not answered the question, but I'm going to move on.
All right, Ray. In segment one, you took the position that these torture tactics used by the CIA doesn't work for various reasons. Give us, let's start there. Let's talk about your evidence that this doesn't work, because as you said in segment one, it is Hollywood that leads you to believe that the torture tactics work, because we see it again and again, and we know there is proof that there is such a collaboration between CIA and FBI and U.S. Policies, and what Hollywood actually shows us in some of these movies. So give us a sense of where the research and the data is in terms of these type of tactics not working to keep us secure.
Well, the best source really is a Senate Intelligence Committee investigation based on original CIA documents that showed, after a 4-year investigation, the executive summary was released in December of 2014, which showed that the protestations, the arguments surfaced by people like Gina Haspel, most of the actual names are redacted, were not only false, but misleading in the extreme. They kept telling everyone, including the president, this was working, we were getting effective information from these interrogation techniques. But when the cables were looked at scrupulously through these Senate staffers, it was revealed that there was not one piece of information attributable to these enhanced interrogation techniques that was not gotten by other more traditional means of interrogation which do not violate the law. So That was a red herring in the beginning, and she knew that, of course, and no one refers to this Senate Intelligence Committee document, and it should not be ignored. The fact that that document was prepared under Dianne Feinstein, the predecessor of Senator Richard Burr, who is now the chair. And at the very, very end of Senator Feinstein's tenure, when the Senate was changing hands, and that's the end of 2014, okay, when Richard Burr was just about to take the cudgel, the gavel, guess what happened? They had completed the investigation, and they were delaying until Senator Burr would take the chair. And Feinstein, to her credit, went to Obama, and she did this through the Senate Majority Leader, and she said, "Look, we need to publish this document. My people have worked hard, and they've worked on original documents. Despite the fact that John Brennan tried to hack into our computers, we have the document. You have to print it, Mr. President." And Mr. President Obama cooperated so tightly with John Brennan that he opposed it till the end, until the election in November, when Mark Udall from Colorado, member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, lost his re-election. And so he went to Senator Feinstein and said, "You know, I feel strongly as Senator Wyden does about this. You go tell the president that I'm going to read the executive summary from the floor of the Senate. What have I got to lose now?" So he's got a choice. I read it from the floor of the Senate, or he releases the redacted version, which disguises Habsburg name of him. So I can see Obama. I don't know this for sure, but he called up Brennan. "John, I'm sorry. You know, we can't let the whole thing be read, so I'll just release it. We'll tell the press to downplay it. And sorry, but that's what we do." So that's on the record. What's the first thing the Senator Richard Burr did? He said, "I own the Senate investigation. I want all copies returned to me, and I want them returned to me immediately." Now, if Haspel and her co-conspirators were in charge, which they were, I'm sure they delivered it the next day by courier. The others, there were only 5 others, I think, and they probably do. But there's one that's extant. It's said to be in the Obama library. Now, we know that? I don't know. Maybe 50 years from now, I'll know that. So that exists. And Burr showed his hand the first day as chairman, said, "I want all those copies returned." What's in those? That document shows that heinous techniques. Waterboarding is just one of them. How about rectal feeding? Okay. Now, rectal hydration could be legitimized in some medical applications, but rectal feeding? What is that all about? It's rape. And there were other things shown in that. Putting people in small boxes, people known to have fear of insects, and putting lots of insects. Give me a break. It was awful. So what does Burr want to do? Burr is joined at the hip with the people he's supposed to be exercising oversight over. It's not an oversight committee. It's an overlook committee. And Burr's been around in that committee for 12 years. He's seen it all. He's approved it all. And it'll be very embarrassing for him to see Haspel go the way that she should go, be rejected. I still hold hope that she will be rejected because I have a basic sense of the decency that reflect the American people and their senators. And so I think that there's a good chance that she will be rejected for cause, and that's the only moral solution. Now, let me just add the moral part here. Is torture wrong because it's illegal? It is illegal. Of course, we know that. I mean, Ronald Reagan was the guy that insisted that the U.S. adhere to the United Nations Convention on Torture. Ronald Reagan, and it was signed and approved by George H.W. Bush. So, is it illegal? Of course, it's illegal. That's not why it's wrong. No, it's not wrong because it's illegal. It's illegal because it's just plain wrong. Human beings don't do that to other human beings. That's been understood since the Spanish Inquisition, okay? So if you talk about morality, and as Richard Burr did talk about the American moral values, well, It's the moral values that put torture in the same category as rape or slavery. In philosophy, in ethics, we learned that category is called intrinsic evil, always wrong, no exceptions. And the fact that the law says the same thing, well, it's not the law that makes it wrong. It's the basic American values. It's the basic universal values as reflected in the UN declaration that really Ronald Reagan was so in support of. And so, think back, that was 80, 85 or so. Where are we now? I have a little story, and I hope you have time for it. A young boy, 3 years old, was with his father, and they were picking up some books for their mother, who was studying to be a priest, okay? And the little boy comes in, and in this little sanctuary, there's a picture of the crucifix with Jesus's body on it, okay? Now, the little boy looks at that, he said, "Daddy, what happened?" Now, that's a metaphor for me. I look at these people tortured at Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and I say, what happened? What happened to the people I used to work with? After 9/11, did everything change? Well, I'm forced to conclude that those moral values went into the ash can, and that's very sorrowful for me. The only thing I'll add is that where are the religious leaders on this key subject? Well, I went to a Jesuit university, okay, and I was taught about this intrinsic evil category, and I'm very, very, very sad to say that somehow, with the honorary degree given to John Brennan, a quite aficionado of torture and kidnapping and black sites, they gave him an honorary degree, catch this, honoris causa, honorary degree in humane letters, humane letters. Okay, so the seniors graduating at the time, this is 6 years ago, they said, well, that's crazy. I mean, humane letters? And they went to the president named Joe McShane. They said, Father McShane, what's going on here? And he said, and I quote, torture is a gray area. Well, if torture has been let slip out of intrinsic evil into a gray area just because an alumnus of Fordham University happened to be in the White House and worked on torture and drone killings and so forth, that's a very sad commentary on our religious leadership. And as I finished an article I wrote recently, I said, I have 9 grandchildren, 7 of which still have to choose their college. And it pains me deeply, very deeply, to think that I can't in good conscience recommend my alma mater to any of those 7 remaining grandchildren.
All right, Ray, with that, we'll leave you for now, but we'll get another opportunity to talk about this because Gina Haspel's confirmation isn't quite a done deal as yet. Hopefully, there will be people like you and more people like you trying to affect that confirmation. So I thank you so much for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network. It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Puris coming to you from Baltimore. I hope by now you have seen the brave whistleblower, Ray McGovern, former Army Infantry Intelligence Officer who then served as CIA analyst for 27 years from the Kennedy presidency to the George H.W. Bush presidency. Ray's duties back then included chairing the National Intelligence Estimates and preparing the President's Daily Brief, which included briefing President Ronald Reagan. He was Reagan's 5 most senior national security advisors from 1981 to 1985. Well, 2 days ago, in an act of civil disobedience, Ray McGovern protested the confirmation of Gina Haspel as CIA's director. Here is what happened.
Stop resisting! Stop resisting!
It's on the record.
Stop resisting!
And in many respects, you guys go into secret private. I'm not resisting.
Yes, you are.
No,
Give me
I'm
your arm.
lying on the ground.
Give me your arm.
I'm lying on. I bet you
Give me
it's
your
dislo-
arm.
It's dislocated,
Give
man.
me your arm.
My left arm is
Give me your arm.
My left arm is dislocated. Damn it!
Give me your
Don't you
arm.
understand?
Stop hurting
Stop just
him.
fighting.
Don't you understand? My left arm is. Ah! I'm not a terrorist.
Sir, get up when you
I'm a
see it,
CIA
Roll him on
alumnus.
his side.
27 years, analyst and operations.
Now sit up, sir.
Waterboarding, 10 never.
Ray McGovern joins us today from Washington, D.C. Ray, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, Ray, it looks like you underwent some torture of your own there. How is your arm? And tell us what happened to you once you were taken into custody.
Well, I do have this chronic dislocation from my left shoulder from a basketball injury, but luckily it didn't go out this particular time. I did suffer the bruises from and the cuts from, you know, the steel handcuffs and that kind of thing. But I'll survive. You know, we make a joke in the Bronx about when this happens to somebody, we say, "You should see the other guy." The other five in the hospital right now. I make a joke, of course.
All right, you're being funny, Ray, but how long were you in custody and what happened during that period?
Well, I was put in this jail cell about 2, 3 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, and not until after 5 o'clock was I released, having appeared before a judge and being accused of disrupting Congress and resisting arrest. So you heard the police saying, "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Here I am. You know.
All right, so
Here
you were detained for 27 hours. Now, why did you, a 78-year-old man, find it necessary to engage in such an act of civil disobedience to get your point heard about the Haspel confirmation? I mean, you're no lightweight. You have access to Congress. You are meeting with people from the Hill all the time. Why did you find it necessary to be heard in that manner at that hearing?
Well, two things I'd say, Sharmini. Number one, I took a solemn oath to protect and support the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. One oath. I checked. It has no expiration date. What's going on with respect to torture was a gross violation of our laws, international law, and the Constitution of the United States. This is no trifling matter. My colleagues and I still uphold that Constitution. Now, the second thing, of course, was, gosh, this person was introduced and supported by our old colleagues. My God. Now, that was really painful for me. I see Charlie Allen and others with whom I worked for years who were responsible, people with integrity. But after 9/11, everything changed, okay? Now, the proximate cause of my doing what I did was when the chair started his comments, he said, and I have to quote him specifically here, and I'll have to put on my broken glasses to do it. But here's what Richard Burr, the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said. We are in open session now. We're going to close session. There will be people who have comments, and I tell them to do so, do it fast, do it quickly, and be gone. And everybody sort of shuddered. Well, I said, wow, I've never had a chairman of a committee invite people from the audience to make a quick, a rapid comment and then be gone. So when it became clear that Gina Haspel was avoiding the key answer that Senator Wyden asked her, namely, were you in charge of the waterboarding of al-Nashiri in Thailand? And she said, well, Senator, I'm sorry, but that's classified. And he didn't have time to say, well, who classified it? But the answer to that, of course, is me. I classify. So you have a situation where the head of the CIA acting is classifying information that incriminates her and should disqualify her from becoming the director of CIA. So she said, we have to go to closed session for that. So that was my question. I went up and I said, look, Senator Wyden is entitled to a straight answer on that. You all know because you have the documents. I know because it's been public. So the notion that Gina Haspel can say, no, we can't let the American people know, there being millions of American people watching this hearing, that's what public hearings are all about. The notion that she said, no, I classified this. And that was a little too much. So I said, she's entitled to a straight answer. And besides, torture is never legal. It cannot be named legal. And that's, of course, it was too much for me to just leave or be gone, as the chairman had said. I was assisted, as those videos show.
All right, Ray, let's just briefly look at the exchange about the most crucial issue at stake in these hearings in terms of Gina Haspel's position. She's being questioned here by Kamala Harris about torture. Let's have a look.
The president has asserted that torture works. Do you agree with that statement?
Senator, I don't believe that torture works. I believe that in the CIA's program, and I'm not attributing this to enhanced interrogation techniques, I believe, as many people, directors who have sat in this chair before me, that valuable information was obtained from senior al-Qaeda operatives that allowed us to defend this country and prevent another attack.
Is that a yes?
No, it's not a yes.
All right, Ray, let me get your reaction to that exchange.
Well, that's disingenuous in the extreme. Torture doesn't work. The saddest thing in my experience is that most Americans think that torture works. That's Hollywood. That's TV. That's with a big assistance from the CIA, okay? It doesn't work. The head of Army Intelligence, on the same day that George Bush was advertising the benefits and effectiveness of enhanced interrogation techniques, General John Kimmons got up before the press in the Pentagon 1 hour before, gutsy general, and John Kimmons said, and I quote, "No reliable intelligence has ever come from harsh interrogation techniques. History shows that, and the experience of the last 5 years, hard years, also demonstrates that, period," end quote. Last 5 years, 2006 minus 5, 2001, when people like Gina Haspel and her bosses were devising ways that they could use enhanced interrogation techniques. Let me make one more point here. Enhanced interrogation techniques is a direct translation of verschärfte Vernehmung. Okay? Where do I get that from? I get that from the Gestapo handbook. I can show it to you. It's the title of the chapter that deals with verschärfte Vernehmung, enhanced interrogation techniques, and the ones used at these black sites. Most of them appear right on the list of the Gestapo handbook and its list of techniques. So, you know, it would be helpful if these people knew something about history. At least they would have used a different terminology. But as I say, verschärfte is sharpened or enhanced. Vernehmung, interrogation techniques, that's what the Nazis used. That's what the Gestapo used. And that's what our black sites were using. And Gina Haspel, you supervised the waterboarding of al-Nashiri, and we can prove, everybody knows that, but she was unwilling to say a straight answer to that when Senator Wyden asked her, because she had retroactively classified that information, and she could only talk about it in closed session. I mean, what kind of country is it that has an open hearing, an ostensibly open hearing, and Wyden's time had expired, but you would expect Richard Burr, the chairman, to say, now, Miss Haspel, that's a simple question. You know the answer. We know the answer. The American people need to know the answer. Did you supervise the waterboarding and worse or waterboarding, let's say, of al-Nashiri in Thailand? And she would have had to say, well, yes, sir, I did. And then the American people would know that this is a person that the president who thinks torture works and torture and work and worse should be implemented has picked to be the head of the CIA. And she says, well, no, we're going to do moral stuff now. And they say, well, if the president orders you to do that, she, oh, he would never order me to do. You know, it just doesn't parse. And the American people are deprived of the real information here. And that's what got me up to try to clarify the situation. And I only got like a half a sentence out before you saw those four gentlemen from the security folks who apparently hadn't heard the chair say, look, if you have something to say it quickly and then be gone. Well, I was going to be gone, but I was helped to be gone. Let's put it that way.
Right. So in the great nation of freedom of speech, your speech was muted, to say it mildly. Ray, please join me to continue this discussion in our second segment. I thank you and those of us who are listening to this interview. I invite you to join me and Ray in the next segment. Thank you.